Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and I'm thrilled to have with me today, Nick Bulwin, another Nick. We're going to be talking with him about consciousness, consciousness when it comes to innovation, when it comes to new products, and maybe even something more on the sci-fi side as well. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Nick, it's wonderful having you here today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having this conversation because here we are in 2021, and I think if anything, we could agree that 2020 was a state of conscious retreats. We needed to definitely reset from that year for sure.
Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. So, Nick, before we start the recording, you were telling me a little bit about the work that you're doing, and I understand you're doing something around supporting new technology related to consciousness. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes. So for the last 4 years, I have been studying consciousness at the level of where it's going to go at the point of consumerism and how data, more importantly, is the cornerstone of collective conscious thought. My background for the past 12 years has been heavily surrounded around the digital marketing side of things. However, I took digital marketing into a big data psychology aspect of looking at how migration patterns work, where like decision-making processes happen. And a good symbolism of this is kind of like, if you think about how that whole Cambridge Analytica thing happened, it's a really good indicator of like how powerful data and understanding data is thought of conscious collective. If someone understands that really well, how much that could turn the macro events of our world. So ever since social media existed, I love to look at like, all right, what makes people click? It's kind of like asking what makes people tick. So I studied this for about 12 years. And over the last 4 years, I intensively have studied things surrounding how all the content that we absorb and the amount of hours that we spend absorbing that content, how that affects both our subconscious, conscious, and superconscious thoughts, and how that relates to why depression patterns are spiking, why people are developing anxiety, amongst other ailments that people say that they receive from just consumption on their phone. I even study things such as if people are looking at content that would fit towards the negative spectrum, how that would affect the human body, and also how it would affect the viewpoint of how it sees the world. This ability of being able to have this qualitative and quantitative study is a great way to even introduce how us as human beings have been evolving, because we didn't have this technology where our, Gen X and all the way up to the boomers and, the silent generation, they didn't have this type of high dopamine technology release type of environment, let alone a Starbucks in every corner. So it's like when you introduce, a world that's strung up on stimulants and a phone that is a energetic stimulant, we have designed a society that didn't create foundations that help support the mind going through this quantum leap forward of accessing information. Could you only imagine if Einstein had a computer?
The question is, would he get more done or less done?
I think he would have gotten so much done that he would have realized what's the point of life at a certain point.
Or you could say that if Einstein grew up with the access to social media that the children nowadays have, maybe he would never have had the time to do his famous thought experiments and had the space to get distracted and let his mind wander.
Yeah, I find it interesting because a quantum computer recently solved an equation that could take a normal advanced computer 10,000 years to solve. It solved that equation that would have taken a normal computer 10,000 years in like less than like 6 minutes or 6 seconds. It was something like that. It was so stark in a comparison that you were in the realization that all someone needs to do is write an if-then code statement. Because if it could solve a problem that's 10,000 years in advance, it could go through so many variables of if-then statements of a single way of someone pouring a cup of water and all the things that could go wrong. And then it could literally dictate from that point on sensory like perception of if people just had things of how they move the cup, and then go through all the variables of that nature. And then you parallel that with all the different types of like gravities that we could be on different planets or different altitudes or whatever. It's like, this is the type of access that we're going to have. And it's not going to be at the level of having a massive supercomputer in our home, because our cell phones, all it needs is a special chip, and it can access the energy that it will, essentially connect to from the quantum source. So when human beings are going to be able to even ask the most complex philosophical questions that most people would only find the answer to through psychedelic experiences, and a computer could give an answer like a genie lamp soon. It's like, this is where we're discussing where the birth of AI is going, because AI has consciousness. It's like, before we even write the code, there's the heartbeat of the life of it. Like, I'm sorry, but a 10,000 like year old like equation imagine if we had to figure out how to save the world in 10,000 years, and we had one computer and we had to wait 10,000 years for it to load or the answer to show up.
Well, I think that was the premise of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's
Yeah.
exactly, they built the most powerful computer in the universe and got the answer and didn't know what the question was.
Yeah.
So let's take it back a little bit. You said you've been studying sort of your insights around people's access to technology, how much time they're spending with it, and the impact that has, if I can paraphrase what you said, on their id, their ego, and their superego. The sort of the three levels of conscious thought and unconscious thought. What sort of things have you found there?
Well, one of the things I found is this. If, let's say, you could identify how your own facial reactions, your own body language could speak its own language, but you were unaware of how it used to speak. Like, you would just have these, we call them tics, like where maybe we clear our throat in certain actions, where it may be an environment or word phraseology that makes someone feel uncomfortable. So every single time things like happen, you would swallow and you're like, oh, why do I keep doing these things? What's the root cause of why I seem to show a sense of anxiety? Because there's certain people who are really attuned to that type of stuff, like reading those type of cues. And imagine you could improve your emotional intelligence by understanding your body's intelligence of how it reacts. Like, for the first time ever, we are engaging in conversations where I have to sort of see myself as mini me while staring at your face, and also knowing I'm not looking you in the eyes. But it's like messing up the entire fabric of how our species interacts, especially in a business setting. Like, of course, podcasting is different, but like the level of even podcasting that used to exist used to be in the studio, where we'll be chilling like Joe Rogan and talking with one another. So having this type of dialogue now that people are having more as the communication style versus meeting people in person, let alone seeing their face, like, is doing ripple effects to our conscious communication amongst each other. And if we're not aware of these things, it's going to create a negative impact towards our other parts of communicating with each other, that over time could show off as negative cues versus um, positive views. Imagine people just forgot how to smile. Like that subtle cue is a cue where you're able to like really see like, wow, like a world without smiling. Kids don't know about that. We're old enough to understand, but these young kids, they're not. And they remember, So like I'm always consciously thinking about like, all right, when I was like 6, 7, 8 to 12, I was thinking like, what's the world gonna look like when I'm 25 to 35? Because they say I could live to 100, so I gotta start like preparing in my life, at least to the cornerstone. So like that's a lot of these kids right now think this way because of all the generations of our parents telling us how we gotta think. So these kids are so freaking smart, and they realize that us as an older generation, we're still behind. We're so behind, and there's so much age discrimination going on that it's like really hard for any of these young leaders. Like I'm 30 years old and I still feel discriminated against. You know what I'm saying? And you could relate because if we like stepped into the room of a Fortune 500 boardroom, those members are going to be 65 and up. And they have a different culture background of what they see the world. So it's like this is a situation that you're seeing when you look at like the macro events of like all the CEOs who stepped down, all the changes that are happening within business economic structures, and how in this next 10 years, brands that are not focused on social impact initiatives, how their brand is more than just a hip brand and a good, cool logo with a overpriced tagline. It's going to be about how capitalism is going green instead of capitalism going political. Because I feel like capitalism has been going political, but what does that do? It just adds more anxiety noise and division amongst their customers. I believe it needs to turn into conscious branding of how it's moving the collective conscious as they already do. If you see a Nike swoop symbol and you're trying to think about what you need to do, there's a good chance that you're going to just say, I'm just going to do it because you saw the Nike swoop symbol, But now if you're seeing a Nike swoop symbol and people are doing riots and bad things around, the neighborhoods, but it's the only thing that they could afford because they could buy it at TJ Maxx, then it's like, this is the level of branding where it's like, wow, we have to look at our brand now differently because we need to do more positive things, because just because people could wear our colors and wear our symbol, we don't want our symbol to go down in ruin with the ruin of a potential conscious collapse of societies.
I think there was a lot of examples in 2019, 2018, and especially 2020 of companies that are, and you can debate whether they're doing it for marketing or doing it for a higher purpose, who are changing the way they approach business, changing the way that they are talking with their customers, like the Gillette adverts around being a better man, like the Nike using Colin Kaepernick as a, for some people, very controversial figurehead. Some companies deliberately closing their stores on Black Friday and suggesting people don't go out shopping. There are sort of examples of companies taking a stand, they would say. What's the view you have on this? Is it sort of in line with what you're thinking, or does that not go far enough?
I would say it's the start. If we keep that as like the bar, then it's just going to show the level of incompetence that we had for every generation, where it's like, okay, this is as far as their leadership was willing to take it versus the level of where, let's say, if we were to ask Gen Z, hey, Gen Z, what would you like for this brand? Because if you want it to survive for the next 20 to 30 years, you're going to exist for the next 20, 30 years. So you're going to be the only people buying it. So like, what would you like to see us do to make our brand integrity better? Because brands evolve. Think about Tesla and Elon Musk as a brand. Like, whoever is the conscious leader of a market category shapes the culture of the collective society. The CEO of these brands, they're essentially going to need to be a figurehead of excellence. No different than if we look at the United States and we were like, oh, Trump, oh, Biden. Well, the only reason we're even saying is because they're a representation of our country. If we're going to be wearing clothes that symbolizes our personality, who we are as a individual, we do not want to start having brands that are not helping me even as an individual. Like, do I feel good wearing the clothes that I wear? What has American Eagle done lately that makes me say, you know what? American Eagle's mission is adding to my conscious energy of enlightenment. Makes me feel good.
What if the American Eagle shareholders say, well, we actually think our purpose is to keep the company in business and make money? So where's the disconnect there?
I would say that disconnect of financial and greedy corporate ignorance is not going to be felt until the damage was done with that thought process in the typical span of 10 years. Think about Blockbuster. You know, I would just say, like, they probably sneezed at a vending machine. We got a store. we could give you popcorn and candy. Absolutely. While you rent your stuff. But no, like, that's the point. Like, I would say that you cannot underestimate, just looking at history alone. If we looked at history repeating itself, if we were to look from the 90s to the 2000s and the 2000s to now, that's 2 generations that we both lived through that we had buying decisions. They sneeze at the idea. Every single time I speak to a CEO or an investor, they always sniff their noses at this idea that the younger generation doesn't have money. They're not the buyers. And I'm like, okay, then why does the data show that they have the highest buying power? And it's right then and there where I see and realize that
Does the data show that?
What?
Does the data show that?
Yeah, data shows that clear as day. And then when you think about when you were a kid and you wanted to buy anything and you didn't have the money, you also had the highest influence of telling your parents what you wanted. So even at the nature of vocal conscious influence within buying powers of a family, and also now the buying power of what a 13 to 18-year-old has versus a 25 to 35-year-old person has, it's like, even if their cash flow of assets to liabilities is going to be like astronomically different. And if you were to design brands that, let's say, to them, they have the money, but they want to maybe give the money to something that's going to help them out in 10 years because they're designing something that is worth buying that same brand and all the new collections, you know, for the future. You know, it's like, imagine if Apple, that's hoarding so much freaking money, was able to say, hey, we're going to ask our users in a cool survey what they would like to see the world in the next 20 to 30 years. And we're going to give you 4 cool ass things that are going to blow your mind, and you can vote on which ones you want. All you have to do is keep buying our brand, and you'll be having an access to what we create. Simple thing like that. Like, you know how they have the Apple Card? Every single person who has an Apple Card, that's part of the membership benefits. Like, if they were to introduce that type of stuff, every single person from Gen Z all the way up to the silent generation would be like, if I'm still alive, I would love it.
Absolutely.
And that's the culture of what brands need to start thinking about versus trying to just get something that helps the bottom dollar in the stock market. Because
So what's your part of this journey? How do you and the work that you're doing sort of help the world move towards that?
Yeah, so for right now, I'm identifying brands that can start making this pivot. So their business strategy is sound for this within the next 10 to 15 years. Like, this is the time period where in the first 5 years of this implementation, you have to have a sound plan of how you're going to migrate towards this. And then from the year 5 to 10, that's when you're really accelerating into this new golden age of where things are moving into. Many brands haven't even had this thought yet, when they should have had this thought 5 years ago. So everybody's trying to play catch up right now. So I am playing the game of consulting and migrating these brands based on all the scientific research that I've already taken to study what makes millennials and Gen Z the future of humanity, the future of brands, health, lives, livelihood. Like, they don't realize how powerful these markets are. And if they're going to fall into the ignorance of what they did with the late gen millennials, you just look at the pattern and you'll be like, damn, we can't mess this up twice. Because if you look at even the stock market trends of the brands that are cornerstone brands, even like Walmart and Target and all these other brands, especially the brands that exist in malls, that malls are completely shut down. So you imagine all those mall brands, they catered towards that traffic, and that traffic was typically older, and they didn't really adjust to the people who were walking around the mall but was looking down at their phone, not at the storefronts anymore. So it's like, this is where this type of conscious consulting and leadership consulting is so important. So that way, not only CEOs of major brands or emerging brands could start developing this conscious intellect and this new form of transparent content marketing, I would call it, where brands who buy the brand could get more than just a lame ass like email newsletter of the CEO saying some boilerplate looking thing. Like, personally, in 2020, I was hoping to hear one CEO, not even on a video, it could have been a really good audio, speak from the heart. Because if I was a CEO, and I was, and I lost my agency from this pandemic, I went through a wicked divorce, and saying goodbye to my employees was heartbreaking. And if I was a company that was even funded by investors and everything I went through to get those investors to buy in, and then they lost their investment, and every single person that was employed lost their job, like, you read about this imposter syndrome, and you read about how entrepreneurs go through so much mental turmoil. However, you don't see anyone stepping up or talking about what they went through in 2020 as hardship, because even though you might have money, that psychological pain, money can't cure. And I'm hoping that with what I'm working on and what I'm consulting and trying to gain awareness for of authentic leadership dialogue gives this open opportunity where leaders could say, yeah, during this time, this is what I went through. And it's a different sound from what we're used to hearing from senior leadership, where it's like another mock-up of a president reading a script. It's like a real honest, heartfelt feeling, because never ever in the history of humanity have we had something that could document this type of event, and also give an opportunity for the next generation to see how to treat leadership during times of adversity. Because we could go on YouTube and watch all the greatest Steve Jobs videos, and be inspired. But I'm like, all right, that was 1980. Like 2020 was a hard ass year. And we would have been great with a guy like Steve Jobs, maybe like giving some cool inspirational advice. But if we're going to just stay silent, then we're only hurting the generation that needs to hear somebody talk. So I'm
Absolutely.
hoping that this type of dialogue and all the future dialogues that this could help birth, and that I could help consult and design for brands and future entrepreneurs. This is the level of consulting that I know is very needed to help guide companies and leaders forward.
So unfortunately, we're coming up to the end of the podcast. But if companies do want to start this dialogue and they want to get in touch, what's the best place they can go to find out more?
I would say I'll give them my direct number. They could text me. It's the best way to just go right into this, especially if they heard this conversation. They're like, all right, he gets it. Let's just talk.
Perfect.
Tell them to text me at this number, 970-689-4726. And if they wish to email me, they can email me on my personal email, Nicholas, Nicholas, Bulwin, Bulwin, @gmail.com.
Perfect. First time I think a guest has ever given out their personal email and phone number. I'll make sure to link those down in the description below. Nick, it's been wonderful speaking with you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Nick. Thank you. It's been a real great delight. I hope this was like very valuable and a unique conversation for you to have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders, and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they're backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.